Mark Elzweig, first off, let me thank you for being here today, for being my guest on the webinar. We're gonna cover an awesome topic. Let me give a quick introduction. I didn't really prepare anything, Mark, but I don't feel like I have to. First off, I'm thrilled to introduce you to my network, Mark. This, like I said, this is a little bit off topic from the webinars that we usually do, because mostly it's about business development or marketing topics, but you've got such a great base of knowledge. And I think it's so important for those folks that are tuning in today and registered for this event. We'll get the recording out tomorrow. For those of you tuning in, I'm Charlie Van Derven. I'm joined by my buddy Mark Elzweig. Mark has been a recruiter in our industry for, I don't mean to date you, Mark, but like 30 years or some dang thing, right?
30 plus. I'm pretty dated, though. That's
30
okay.
30 plus, right? So in addition to being a heck of a nice guy and a guy I've gotten to know quite well over the last 3 or 4 years here, you've got a wealth of knowledge that I think 30 years ago was a much more difficult uphill climb for you, in that transition was a lot more difficult, right? But we see a ton more transition in the industry now. Technology has been largely commoditized, so it's easy. You don't have to work with one of the big firms to get the best technology anymore. So I think that
Right.
Greases the skids a little bit. And our topic today, what we're going to talk about, is advisors positioning the best deal if they make a transition. So Mark's going to hit on a handful of topics here, and of course I'm going to monitor the chat and answer, and ask any questions that you come up with. So either put your questions in chat or the Q&A box. I'll be monitoring both of them. But we're going to talk about the things that you need to be considering if you're making a move to a different firm or starting your own RIA. Of course, that the deals are a little different at that point, Mark. But
Right.
Mark Elzweig, a ton of knowledge, a heck of a nice guy. We talked a little bit about your patience in leading up to the kickoff here, Mark. If
Thank
you're
you.
considering a move, I fully endorse Mark Elzweig to have your best interest in mind, to have a ton of knowledge, and to help you through that transition, which, listen, can be difficult. He's done it numerous times over the last 3 decades, and certainly is positioned to help make your transition a whole lot easier than it would be alone. So, Mark, with that,
Thank you.
I'm going to monitor chat. I'll ask you questions as we go along the way, and take it away a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about the basics of transitioning.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Charlie. Delighted to be here and have appreciated our relationship over the past couple of years as well, very much.
Thanks.
So the first thing to know is that number one, deals are better than they've ever been. The reason for that is the advisor population is aging. The average advisor, according to Cerulli research, is like 56. So you have an aging advisor population where a big chunk of advisors, a large chunk, don't feel like moving because of their age. And at the same time, the number of options has dramatically expanded. So there are a lot of firms that exist now and a lot of types of choices that weren't even around 2 years ago. So it's a very competitive marketplace, and that's kept the deals high, and will do so in the foreseeable future. But I want to just jump into one thing about deals is that you have to understand the basics about whatever deal you're being offered. So what you need to know is, first thing is, how long is the deal? What's the term of the deal? Right now, wirehouse deals are pretty much 10 years. Up until 2017, they are only 7 years. But as firms, shell out more money, they need you to stay there longer, to get the desired return. So a wirehouse deal is 10 years. If you're joining like an independent broker dealer, deals there are somewhere between 5 and 8 years, typically. So that's the range. There's less money involved, so the deal is shorter. So one thing you want to know is, what's the term of the deal? Then you want to understand certain basics like forgivability. Is the deal being forgiven? Does it amortize monthly or does it amortize yearly? Because there are certain firms, like one major wirehouse, for example, where the amortization takes place on anniversary dates. And that's always very important to know, especially if for any reason you're considering leaving at any point before the deal ends. which you hope doesn't happen, but you never know. The other things to know is basically you want to be aware of interest and taxation. So typically, things vary somewhat from firm to firm, but typically the firm will give you the interest and then to pay on the loan. And there has to be interest, or else the upfront deal is not viewed by the IRS as a loan. So, but it's good to know about the mechanics. But the other thing you do need to know, the part that will come out of your pocket is taxes. So if you're on a 10-year deal and of course you're going to get all the money up front, but if the contract makes it that you know, a piece of the deal is being amortized every month or it's being amortized on a yearly basis, you'll have to pay taxes on whatever amount is amortizing
Gotcha.
in that period. So that's the thing you want to be sensitive to, that obviously for it to be a real loan, you have to pay taxes. So the first thing to know again about deals is really just those basics, about the structure, basics in terms of structure.
Mark, quick question for you.
Hmm.
You opened by talking about deals are bigger than probably they've ever been. Um,
Right.
there's a lot of VC money coming into financial services.
Yeah.
How does that, I mean, you know, if you have knowledge on it,
Hmm.
is that a window that you see continuing? Or, is that a finite situation where take advantage of it now because of the VC money isn't in financial services? And I think that maybe particularly plays into the role of moving to an RIA, perhaps.
Yes. Yes.
Speak around that VC money if you can in any way.
I think it's an ongoing trend because it's basically private equity firms are now investing in multi-custodial RIAs,
Okay.
and they're either taking, in some cases, minority shares where they might own up to 20%, or there also are some cases where they own the entire firm. And what that's done, the deals there are very attractive. And when we get into what the deals are like in each channel, that's definitely something that I think is very important to understand. What it's doing is, one, the deals are unusually lucrative, and two, it's expanding the array of options for advisors. It's a very relevant factor in keeping the deals very strong. And I think that's something that's destined to continue and increase in the coming years because
Yeah,
these are
cool.
very good investments. Our RIAs, if they're well managed with a relatively small amount of people, can generate a lot of revenue and a lot of profits, and they're very attractive investments. So I think the interest on the part of private equity firms is really just getting started and very likely to continue.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
that's what I see.
So we've got a question from our buddy and attendee, Daniel. Daniel, thanks for being
Hmm.
here. Thanks for asking a question. Mark, do you know
Hmm.
anything about integrity marketing and their role in financial planning? I don't.
I've heard of them, but I really am not familiar with them.
Okay, I'll tell you
I
what.
kind of heard of
As
them,
Yeah,
um, but I'm not really familiar with them.
yeah, and it doesn't touch anything for me. But I'm going to do a little research while we're talking. When we'll get you going
Okay.
on our next topic, and then I'll dive into Google and Daniel. I'll do a little digging if I can. Um, okay,
Oh,
okay.
I
So
see.
yeah,
Well, that's
Daniel
interesting
says.
that it's a huge VC.
Sure, it's coming.
Um,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, I'm interested now in researching it myself,
Yeah.
and I'm
Yeah.
going to write it down. But
Yeah.
it's not one that it's not one that it's not one that I've kept up with. I mean,
There,
what I
Mark.
could do, I don't
Yeah.
know if I should do it now, but I could really um, I'll describe how these firms that have private equity backing,
Well, I
the
don't.
kinds of deals they offer to advisors, because
Well,
maybe
I don't. I
I
didn't mean
sh
to drive you forward in your presentation, Mark. I
no, that's okay.
getting
No,
you out
that's
of
okay.
cadence, but Daniel's got a conversation he's having with him right now, so maybe it's very
Okay.
timely. Yeah.
Yeah, so let me just give you some information. I think that's the main point.
Yeah.
What happens is when there's a group of there is a group of RIAs that are multi-custodial. They offer advisors several custodial options. They're turnkey in the sense that they do your compliance, They provide you with technology. They take a very active role in having you in getting you set up. But here's what a deal would look like if you join one of these firms. The main thing is you're able to monetize part of your cash flow. So let me explain what that means. Because actually was new to me when I first encountered it, and I enjoyed having to learn about it too. Let's say that your team is doing, I don't know, 2 million. You can opt, as soon as you join one of these firms, you can opt to sell part of your cash flow at an accelerated rate. So what that means is, let's say you took 200,000, 10% of your cash flow, and you decide to sell it to the private equity owner. You would get on that amount, you could sell it for an accelerated rate of 5 times or more, like 5 times the 200,000. Now,
Wow.
meanwhile, you still own the accounts. They're absolutely your accounts. You have to service those accounts, but you've been able basically just to monetize part of your revenue stream. And then step two of the process is that you become a shareholder in that entity, in that RIA.
Interesting.
And then when something has private equity backing, there's private equity backing because at some point it's going to be sold. And then you become an equity holder. But stage two is when that firm is taken out, you can sell more of your cash flow at the enterprise rate. So in other words, let's say a firm is taken out at a multiple of 10 times or 12 times, whatever it is. And that's what these firms are going for right now. You could sell another chunk of your cash flow, or depends on the situation, they're all a little different. Some cases, all of it, in other cases, just part of it, another chunk of it. But you could sell that next chunk at the 10 times or 12 times. So
Wow.
so these are very lucrative, and these kinds of situations are attracting some of the top teams in the business.
That's
And,
pretty
and it's a
awesome.
really, yeah, it's pretty awesome. It's
When is
really,
that when does that make sense and when does it not make sense for an advisor?
that's a good question. I think it makes sense. I think it makes sense. You have to be committed to going independent and
Right.
running your own firm. If you really want something, many people are just comfortable in the wirehouse world
Sure.
where everything is more turnkey. They really don't want to go independent. So one, you have to want to go independent. You have to be not only in terms of doing the extra work that going independent entails because you're a business owner, um, but I find when people go independent, they have to have a certain level of internal confidence because you're going to be marketing yourself. You're not going to be marketing yourself with the name of integrity marketing or whatever the private equity entity is. You're still going to be Joe Blow Capital Management, and you have to be comfortable with your own under your own name and under your own branding, going out into the world and growing your business.
Yeah.
I also think for many people it's a very good succession planning tool because you know that you've gotten a big chunk of money, you're positioning yourself to get even more money as you become a stockholder. So so for many people, I think it's a very attractive thing to do.
Love it.
I think it's a trend that I'm finding that people is really resonating. It's really resonating, with a lot of advisors.
Yeah. So I mean the umbrella to this is there's a lot of value in the book that you're building.
That's
Uh,
right.
yeah.
And I want to just say just to keep things in perspective, if an advisor is a standalone advisor and just decides to sell their book,
Yeah.
at current multiples, they may be getting anywhere, assuming it's fee based, they may be getting anywhere from like 2.4 to a little bit over 3, which is pretty good too, but that's a normal spread.
Yeah.
So if you decide to align yourself with a multi-custodial RIA that has private equity backing, you're able to get a rate that's far in excess of that. And that's one of the it's one of the very attractive features here. I find it's a very compelling model, but only for people who want to go independent in the first place.
Right.
And again, I think it's a very good succession planning play as well.
Yep.
If
Well,
you're nearing, the end of, I think it's a very good play. Plus the other thing, without the other thing I would also say is it helps you from a marketing standpoint, because once you're part of a multi-custodial RIA, you can actually manage money at other custodians. So if you've chosen to work with Fidelity, for example, and that's who you custody with, if there's an opportunity where people have money at Schwab or at Pershing, you can actually have them leave the money where it is, and then you can charge them a fee to run it. So that's very different than someone in the wirehouse world, or even most independent broker dealers, where they have to actually deliver the money to your firm. So
yeah.
it's very interesting. It's a
There
lot of possibilities there.
there's so much to know.
Hmm.
I'm glad you're in the space, so I don't have to have all this knowledge, Mark. So I'm gonna get us back on task because we're kind of jumping around a
That's
little bit
okay.
already.
Yeah, I don't want to get
So
away too much.
so we started off really by talking about the forgivable loan aspect of making a move.
Right,
Now,
right.
when a loan is given, and I've watched many people
Hmm.
transition from wirehouse to an independent broker dealer.
Hmm.
Uh, when that loan is given, there are expectations, not just the duration of the stay,
Right.
but there are production expectations as well.
Well, I would say that in most cases, there aren't production expectations written into the contract. Sometimes there are, but I would say just as a practical matter, people want, when you take a deal, people want you to be giving it your very best good faith effort. And
Yeah,
I would say in a first year, they would expect I would say that they would expect you would deliver at least 70% of your assets or gross, however it's being measured,
yeah,
and that eventually, over the course of the deal, you'd get back to your onboard, whatever your onboard gross and asset level was, and then increase it. But what I haven't seen is someone take a deal and then the market gets bad and everyone's production goes down, and then firms start pulling in the trying to recoup the loans. That I haven't seen in many years. I've just seen that I've seen a handful of cases where people took deals and for whatever reason did not make a good faith effort to produce,
interesting.
and then they ran into difficulties. So I would think as long I so I think I guess to answer your question, I think you should never take a recruiting deal unless you're ready to work.
Yeah,
I
agreed.
think if you're just ready to put your feet up on the desk and coast, um, don't do that. You're not going to feel comfortable.
Talk to me about, in addition to that front end loan compensation, talk to me about, are there bonus structures built
Yes,
into these
actually,
relationships?
yes, that's a good question. Most deals have bonuses are based either on doing a certain amount of gross, delivering a certain amount of assets, or some combination thereof. It depends on the firm. What I've observed is that advisors prefer much better situations where their back end bonuses are just contingent upon delivering AUM. And the reason for that is it's more in your control. You either delivering the assets or you're not. Where with if it's production based on the back end, then you're under additional pressures, figure out ways to generate revenue. And I would say that regulators probably prefer an AUM back end as well. So I think in a general rule, in a general sense, rather, I think that's where the industry is going. But if I were an advisor, I would try to get deals based on delivering AUM. I just think it's a lot less pressure. I think
Yeah,
you have a greater sense of control, and I think it's a much better way to go. And I would say that even firms that have production-based back ends, in many cases, you can kind of negotiate to get some of those to be based on AUM as well. But AUM is by far, I think that's the best model. And I think that's what, I know that's what I would prefer as an
Yeah.
advisor.
Yeah. Much more predictable.
Yes.
So our friend Tony asked a question, Mark, and it actually segues us
Mm-hmm.
directly into the next
Mm-hmm.
question I have about how much firms pay. So
Ah.
so Tony's question is, with a 12 to 15 times revenue deal out there,
Mm-hmm.
why are more broker dealer reps not opting in to go straight to these firms? So
Well, uh-huh.
yeah, go
Well,
ahead.
that's a good question. I would say they are. I would say that number one, this model is so new that it's not well understood. And a lot of the people who are opting to do it are some of the very top teams in the business. I mean, most of these firms, minimally, you have to be doing, let's say, 1 million plus to be a candidate in the first place on, predominantly, fee-based business. But I think it's a new model and it's not widely understood. And I think as it's out there longer, more people will, more people will embrace it.
Very cool. So
So I think that's one reason.
talk a little bit about what firms are paying now. Tony kind of threw the number out there as a 12 to 15x, but what
Right. And the 12 to 16x, it's important to understand that you can, in these situations, you can get these accelerated multiples, but you can, let's say, of maybe 5 to 8 times, depends on each company is a little different. And you can do that right after you join. But the 12 to 15x, that's contingent upon that firm being sold for that amount of money. So some people don't like that because they like the fact that when they join a firm, they're going to be able to monetize it at an accelerated rate. And even if the firm is never sold, they're still going to be in a good place
yeah,
because they've had a lot of help to get set up as an independent and they've already monetized a chunk of their business at an attractive rate. But one thing I wanted to touch on that I think is important to know about deals is that a lot of sometimes back end requirements, one thing that's very important is when when you look at the requirements for a back end deal, you need to assess how realistic they are. I mean, some of them are just not realistic. So, for example, if let's assume you have 200 million in assets and a firm says, well, come here and join. And when you grow your business by 50%, when you bring in another 100 million, here's what we're going to give you. Well, I think the chances of you doing that are relatively small. Like in my opinion, I think if a firm is asking you on the back end to do too much more than like 120%, either in whether it's at gross or AUM, I would consider that I wouldn't make a move based on that. I think one good thing to think about in any proposed deal, figure out what's the no-brainer level here. If I'm conservative, prudent, realistic, what am I likely to do? And just in my opinion, um, I mean, I find like the first year, most advisors bring over, 80% of desired clients and assets. But I think if a firm is asking you to deliver like more than 120% of something, I wouldn't, that's all well and good, but I wouldn't use those numbers to influence my thinking as to whether or not I should take the deal because that to me is not really realistic.
right,
Especially if you have a large practice, it might be realistic for like an up and comer kind of advisor. But
right.
if somebody's pretty well established, I don't think the numbers are realistic at more than, let's say, 125% of onboard gross or AUM. So
Well,
that's the point I wanted to make. You really need to figure out with any kind of deal, is what they're asking you to do realistic? What's
yeah.
the no-brainer level here?
Well, and Tony makes a good point in follow up, right? That
Uh-huh.
the growth rates can include acquisition or recruiting of other firms, and the
Oh,
term,
that's true.
right?
Yes.
So he said there at these terms will be far more 60-plus-year-old advisors opting in. So I don't, I won't touch that necessarily. But when you talk about, 100 to 120% growth tacked onto the back end of, these,
Right,
the, that
right.
may be difficult if we're talking about an older advisor
Oh,
base.
yes, that's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
That's,
So,
yes, that's
yeah.
true. That
Yeah.
that could indeed be difficult.
Yeah. Tony, I
Yes,
hope
absolutely.
hope we answered your question. Okay. Let me know. Um, Mark, I know we want to, there's other things to negotiate around, right? It's not just AUM, it's not just the size of the book, but what other
Hmm.
things can advisors negotiate around in
Hmm.
putting a deal together?
Well, I think one thing to think about is if
Oh,
you're joining like another warehouse, travel and entertainment. That's a basic. Some firms, most firms will give you some kind of T&E allowance for the first year, and then after that, plug you into their system. So that's one very basic thing to negotiate for. Um, the second I would say is unvested deferred compensation. Like many people at wirehouses in particular are walking away from a certain amount of deferred comp that has yet to vest. Wirehouses all have ways of addressing that. But regional firms and independent firms, by and large, do not. So if that's a big, if that's a big number, that's definitely something to take into account. Um, the third thing I would say, I guess there are three big things. I mean, there are a lot of things, and I have a whole list of them actually. But the third big thing is sales support, and that's very important because sales support varies widely. At some wirehouses, like 1.5 million in gross,
mhm,
is one full-time assistant,
mhm.
and if you're even reasonably close, they'll pay for a full-time sales assistant, but there's one that's like 1.7, another one that I would say 2 to 2.5 million to get a full-time assistant. So one thing to always consider in a move is what's your sales support right now? Do you need to make it better in some way? And how can a prospective firm help you do that? So that's always something that has to be discussed and negotiated in advance. That's the third. I'd say those are the three things. There are a lot more. There's
Yeah.
titles, there's all kinds of things, but those are like the big three, I would say, to
There's
really be cognizant of.
I don't know that it really impacts our conversation, but one thing that I've
Hmm.
noticed, and I do some coaching with wirehouse advisors, we do marketing
Hmm.
services for independent
Hmm.
advisors.
Hmm.
That's a difficult position for, I mean, firms are having a difficult time even hiring those positions right now.
Yes, they
So
are.
if you've got an option, if you're making a move, if you've got an option to bring your own sales support, by all means, that's really important. Like that's important.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, not only that, I would say that it's one of the things that'll make your transition much smoother.
Yeah.
If you can take a sales assistant who your clients know and like, that is just incredibly helpful. It keeps the client experience the same. They can call the client and get various information
Right.
for different forms that you might need. It's
Yeah.
incredibly helpful. And a good practice there is to see if you can, I always try to do that, bump up the sales assistant's salary.
Cool.
And most advisors will give a sales assistant that they bring like a signing bonus of some sort, and then maybe an incentive later on based on the percentage of AUM that comes over.
Yeah.
But bringing a sales assistant that your clients know is something that can make your move much smoother.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Help you and
Yeah,
help you transition more in assets, right? Uh,
absolutely.
yeah.
So if you can do that, it's a very worthwhile thing to do. It's a very valuable thing to do.
Got a couple of questions. So
Good.
Deborah, thank you for your question. Deborah's wondering, Mark,
Hmm.
are there any options for small RIAs looking to reposition? Um, Deborah's
Hmm.
firm is they're on their first 100 million in AUM.
Hmm.
So that's not small by all people's standards if if they're
No,
approaching that number.
sure.
But as an RIA, does she have options if she wants to? I'm assuming join a larger firm.
Oh, she definitely does. And that's actually a trend now. In fact, I was thinking of even writing an article about it. It's basically what's happening now is a lot of smaller RIAs finding that the demands of compliance, keeping up with the ever increasing, ever changing compliance burden is very onerous.
Yep.
Uh, always being on top of technology and how that's evolving is also another burden. So what some RIAs are opting to do is to join larger RIAs who will take care of their compliance, who will um, take care of following all the evolution of technology to make sure that they're using the right technology, and also will save them. Sometimes a smaller RIA has to have an operations person, working with the custodian, be able not to have someone like that. There are definitely options for RIAs who want to lighten their burden
Yeah.
by partnering with with a larger entity. And 100 million is attractive because that's an attractive amount of AUM. So there are ways to do that where you would still unquestionably be the owner of your RIA. And
Yeah.
that's the best way anyway, I feel.
Yeah.
So there absolutely there are options.
Yeah. So Tony makes a good point here, right? So if you're in if you're in the wirehouse
Mm-hmm.
space, right,
Mm-hmm.
your payout of 38% sounds great. And then
Right.
his point is to find out that 70 to 75% payouts is awesome. And then the reality that 100% exists. And Tony, you wrote that, and then you waited a couple minutes to write that there's a train car load of boxes of hats to wear. That's exactly the point, right? So here's I think the point that Tony's making, and correct me if I'm
Mm,
wrong. Tony, like
mm,
if you're at a wirehouse and you're making a payout of around 40%,
mm-hmm.
um, and then you hear that you can get a 75 or 80% payout, that 40% seems small, but understand absolutely everything has been taken care of for you, right?
Oh, yes.
You
That's
are free
yes.
to grow your book of business. And your comment about all the hats you have to wear, exactly right. You go from being a producer to being a business owner when you make that transition where you can get 100% payout at your RIA, but now you're paying for people and space and technology and compliance and all the other things that come with it.
Well, to Tony's point, which I think is a very good point, when you have, let's say, if your independent payout is nominally, let's say, even 85 to 90%,
Yeah.
once you start stripping out how much your office is going to cost, how much staff is going to cost, health insurance, those are the three big ones. When people go independent as standalones, typically their net is somewhere, let's say, 65% to 75%, somewhere depending on the size of their practice and how well they manage their expenses. So yes, and there is extra work to do. And that's why I found that I don't find that I find there are less people that want to just go out there and set up their own entity. I'm finding more people want to partner with an existing entity that will take care of their compliance technology, help them get set up, and eliminate a lot of those kinds of distractions.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
agree when you say, "Well, I went independent, I have a 90% payout." Well, you really don't. Really, in the final analysis, it's going to be somewhere from 65 to 75, something like that.
Yeah. And so that delta of, call it 25 to
Hmm.
35%, if you're moving from a
Right.
wirehouse into that, is that worth the headaches that come with it? Headache's not the right thing, but there's also the upside, right? Now you can act more as a fiduciary, right? You don't
Hmm.
have the biases of the firm to attend to. You've probably got greater flexibility in your time.
Hmm.
You've got more options for technology.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of really great things that come with that independence, but certainly it creates a whole different load of work that you're not used to at a big firm.
No, exactly. And I think one thing people like about the independent space is the marketing freedom. If you don't have to use canned posts anymore.
Right.
I don't have
Right.
to go onto LinkedIn and see that, 10 people from the same wirehouse posted the same thing that day, which I do see.
Oh yeah, me too.
You have a lot more freedom to craft your own posts, do podcasts,
Yeah.
um, really have a newsletter that really reflects you.
Yeah.
However, it's not for everyone, and I think some people, understandably, like a turnkey model,
Yeah.
where you show up, the
Yeah.
wirehouse has your sales support, the office, and you just focus on working with your clients. And many people prefer that. They feel they're more productive with less distracting hassles. And there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt.
Hmm.
So, Mark, talk a little bit about, one of the points that you and I talked about in preparation for today's conversation
Hmm.
was negotiating strategies.
Hmm.
So, if
Yes.
you elaborate a little bit on negotiating strategies for advisors if they're looking for that transition deal.
Yeah, so that's a good question that I wanted to talk about. Well, one way to get a better deal if you're selling things like products that are more profitable to the firm that you're thinking of joining, you can sometimes use that as a way to get more money. So, for example, if first of all, if you have fee-based business and it's growing, that's an exciting, that's an exciting story if you're heavily fee-based. But the second thing is if you have a lot of cash, I mean, cash, firms make a lot on overnight lending. If you're doing lending, whether it's, mortgages or commercial lending or other kinds of loans, there's a spread there that a prospective firm participates in. So if you're doing those three things, you have already a case why that you can use to boost your deal. So that's one technique that I found helpful. Another one is really, suppose you've moved before. Let's say you can tell a prospective firm, yeah, I've changed firms twice before, and all my clients came.
Yeah.
Well, you're a better bet than someone who's been with a company for 30 years and never moved.
Yeah.
Because you can show that your clients are clearly loyal to you. The third thing I would say that has not been perhaps recognized as much, some people think that you get a better deal by playing one firm off against another, and there is some truth to that. But I feel what I've seen is in the end, people want to feel loved and wanted. And once you decide on the firm where you feel your business, your clients are going to thrive and grow, and you make the case to that firm that based on their platform, this is why you can grow your business in a very substantive way. And this is why you want to join. I find firms like that, a situation like that, rather, firms are very motivated to do whatever they can to hire you.
Yeah.
But if you just sort of take the attitude, well, it's all about numbers. This guy giving me a 5% more on the back, and what can you do about it? When people get like deal fatigue when you do that for too long.
Yeah.
People want to feel that you recognize that they're a great fit for your business and you really want to come. And when they're clear on that, I find well, that's where you want to go anyway. But when they're clear on that, I find they'll do whatever they can to get you there in terms and including boosting the deal.
Yeah, I agree. And we're talking about, today we're talking about deals, right?
Hmm.
But there is much more to this conversation than the money behind it. Certainly
Right,
that's highly
right,
attractive.
right.
But yeah, and um yeah, so we listed a couple of them, right? So I want to look at what are the services provided, right? Like what
Hmm.
are the technology platforms available? Mark, you
Hmm.
brought up marketing, and thanks for that. I
Hmm.
appreciate that.
Yes.
But the ability to actually have your own voice, right? Instead of having to
Right.
draw from the canned firm library. I know a young man who
Hmm.
went to an RIA, and
Hmm.
this sounds crazy to some, but I'll explain it
Hmm. Hmm.
because he could use Instagram. Right now,
Yes. Right.
on first blush, you go,
Hmm.
well, what difference does that make? But I'm telling you, his target market was young athletes and entertainers,
Hmm.
and he knew that his audience was not on LinkedIn and not on Facebook
Mm-hmm.
and, probably
Mm-hmm.
not on Twitter or X now, which is the three
Mm-hmm.
common platforms that that firms allow. He knew
Right.
his audience was on Instagram. And so that very small detail, and I'm sure there were other reasons, but that
Mm-hmm.
very small detail was the deciding factor for this young advisor.
I could see that.
Yeah.
Yes, if you're someone who's no, and I've had people that I've helped go independent and they can just the fact that they can write a newsletter
Yeah.
that's really them
That's them.
has
Yeah.
really yeah, has really been very impactful for them. So if you're serious about if you want that kind of marketing flexibility, then you can get a lot more of that on the independent side of the house.
Well, and then
Absolutely.
my selfish plug is contact social advisors, so we can
Of
help.
course.
But um, Mark, I want to talk. You've got the firm. A lot of firms out there have a team of recruiters, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of us have been contacted by LPL recruiters over the years, or
Mm-hmm.
Lincoln Financial's team, or whatever, right?
Right.
What's the difference? Talk a little bit about as an independent.
Mm-hmm.
Why would someone prefer to work with you as an independent versus this in-house recruiter team that a firm might have?
Right. Well, I think a good independent recruiter, number one, has a lot of options. There are a lot of options that they can present to you and work with you on. So you want a good independent recruiter that has objectivity, who can help you understand what the pros and cons of each situation are. And everything, of course, has a downside. The important thing is to know, what it is, right up front. So you want a good independent recruiter, one that can help you make the right decision. And secondly, if you're negotiating a deal with a prospective firm, you certainly want to use a recruiter that's had a lot of experience negotiating deals with that particular firm, because someone like that knows where a firm can be pushed to deliver more and where it's a complete waste of political capital to try to do that.
Yeah.
What things can't really be changed. So you want to be able to benefit from their experience. So I would say those are the two reasons to use a good independent recruiter.
Well, and having worked with a firm multiple times, you've got relationships with the people you're going to be talking to, where
Oh, exactly. Exactly.
an advisor approaching, and you're representing the advisor, right? So you've got that person's best interest in mind. But having a relationship with that person that you're negotiating the deal with,
Hmm.
certainly helps make a smoother process, probably a faster process.
Yes, and also if you have a good relationship with people at the other firm and you're a tactful person, that means you can eliminate the candidate having to go back and forth in himself or herself
Yeah.
with difficult negotiations. That's something you can take on for them, and it makes the process just smoother and more comfortable, for everyone involved, really.
Love it. Mark, I'm
So
going to go before we wrap today. I want to go off script a little bit, right?
sure, sure.
So we're talking about the deal piece of this. That is
Mm-hmm.
that is not the first thing, right? So
No.
so the people who are tuning in today, right? Because we're on
Mm-hmm.
a little different topic than Social Advisors usually does in our webinars.
Mm-hmm.
So the people who are tuning in today are people that are considering a deal in some capacity or another, right? They're here for a
Mm-hmm.
reason, to learn from your
Mm-hmm.
experience. Now, certainly I would say number one, engage Mark. If you're thinking about a deal, lean on his 30 years of experience of having done this for many, many, many advisors. But one piece of advice that I'll give you, and I'm sure Mark you would echo, is you
Mm-hmm.
know we, depending on where you're coming from, especially if it's a wirehouse, we got to contact an attorney before we do a whole lot, right? I mean, like, understand exactly what your agreements are, understand exactly what you're contractually obligated to, play by the rules. Like, don't
Oh,
feel
yes.
like you're going to download a database and get away with it, right? I mean, like, don't make these mistakes before the transition, because that kind of screws up the whole thing on the back end, right? So
Yes, and part of the process is especially if you're coming from a non-protocol firm, then even more so, you do need well, number one, part of the process is once you've decided to go to a particular firm, there's always a call with legal
Yep.
and there's a call with the transition team because each firm is slightly different in how they want you to do things, but you need to have guidance in terms of if you're coming from a protocol firm versus a non-protocol firm, what's allowed, and whatever the rules are, there's something that you really must strictly adhere to. I think later on you could get an attorney in the sense before you pull the trigger, it's always helpful to have an attorney, read your contract, make sure you understand it, you know, uh, and that kind of thing. But I think as certainly as a starting point, as certainly part of my process, I always make sure that people have had all their questions answered by the legal department and that they thoroughly understand the transition process,
Yeah.
before they start. What does the new account form look like? You have to know that before you jump into the pool,
Yeah.
so you can manage that well. But yes, at some point it's helpful to have it can be helpful to have the guidance of an attorney. But most of the people that you'll read about in trade publications who got sued,
Yeah.
they're all people who basically didn't listen and didn't do what the firm told them to do. And
Yeah.
two basic rules are, one, you can't tell your clients in advance.
Yeah.
And number two, you can't take any material that could be construed as non-public proprietary information. And just about everyone I've seen who's involved in some kind of a lawsuit from their former employer, they
Yeah.
usually did one or both of those things. So it's very important that you protect yourself and protect your clients by being very much by the book.
Yeah, you've got to keep that very closed. You know it's coming for 3 or 6 months before it ever happens. And I know advisors that, are
Mhm.
um yeah, we'll communicate about this with an outside vendor, perhaps through their work email address, right? So you just got to be very careful with how you communicate these things. And engaging a guy like you, Mark, is going to help them stay out of a lot of trouble and make sure they get, the best opportunities on the back end of that.
Exactly, and they don't, and it doesn't require the beauty of the system is if you play by the rules. Excuse me, you don't need to run up huge legal bills.
Yeah.
You just have to, if you follow the rules and you're not going, I mean, you're not going to be in a situation that's going to generate any legal action. So it's way better than it was many years ago where people would leave wirehouses, they would get hit with TROs and it was a whole nightmare. It's if you follow the rules, things work out very well.
Yeah, it's done so much more often today than it was even 10, 12, 15 years ago. I mean, there is a game plan. To your point, follow the rules,
Yes,
follow
there
the
is a
game
game
plan.
plan. There's a game plan. Each firm, and especially if you're coming from a non-protocol firm, each firm has a little bit of a different nuance on want you, how they want you to contact clients.
Yeah.
But if you do what they tell you to do, everything will be fine. And you get a lawyer to read your contract, answer any other questions you have. But it shouldn't be something we have to spend a fortune doing it. And I would say I don't know, a lot of the people that I've worked with haven't even used lawyers, especially if they're coming from a non-protocol company.
Yeah, if
I
you
mean, a
own your own,
protocol firm. They
yeah,
haven't they haven't even bothered to use lawyers. I
yeah,
think if you're coming from a non-protocol firm, there's
yeah.
more reason to be extra cautious. I found most people don't even engage lawyers. They could, it's helpful, but it's also not absolutely necessary.
There's when you're coming from a wirehouse environment, right?
Hmm.
You built that book. Those are your clients, but the wirehouse
Right,
doesn't see it that way, right? So when you
right.
own that book of business, the transition is so much easier. There's no question marks around that.
Oh,
But to
yes.
your point, to
Yeah.
your point,
One thing I learned some years ago when I started talking to independents for the first time. So I started in the 80s just talking to people at wirehouses and regional firms. Is so many people at independent broker dealers told me, my clients don't even know who my broker dealer is. They
that's
don't
it.
know. They
Yep.
don't care. They know me and they know their money is custodied, with Fidelity or Schwab.
Yeah.
And the broker dealer is just kind of a little, oh, it's kind of a little thing on the statement, but it's not really top of mind.
Yeah.
And they have much more control and a lot less anxiety and a lot less stress when they make a change for that reason, because
Yeah.
they unquestionably own their business.
Yeah.
It's a good place to be.
One more question from Deborah is,
Mhm.
could you please clarify non-protocol versus protocol?
Oh, sure. So there was a broker recruiting protocol, forgot the year, but it defined what information advisors are allowed to take when they go from one firm to another. So all the signatories, which at one time, all the major wirehouses, basically said you can take five, just contact information, name, address, cell phone number, email, and type name and type of account. And that's all you were allowed to take.
Yeah.
However, what happened is particularly Morgan Stanley and UBS were losing a lot of people, and they basically withdrew from the broker recruiting protocol, and they have in their contracts non-solicit agreements
Yeah.
where an advisor is not allowed to call and solicit their clients, tell them why the place they've chosen is going to be a great place for them, etc. So those advisors are allowed to, and this is where you really have to have conversations with the legal department. Those advisors are allowed to announce an employment change, but they're not allowed to solicit. So you can leave a company like that, and you can say, "Hey, just wanted you to know, here's where I am." Then you
Yeah.
have to kind of wait for your client to
Oh,
say, "Gee, Charlie, how do I get my big fat account over to you?" And
yeah.
then, and you have to record when that happens. So each one has a slightly different procedure, but non-protocol is only for like those two wirehouses, maybe banks where I don't work with bank brokers that much, but if a bank is giving you the accounts, that's
That's
that's they're not really your accounts. So you're probably operating under some kind of a trade secret agreement there too.
yeah.
But so it's only for that segment of the industry. Everyone else is in a regular, most other firms are protocol members. You used to be able to look it up. For whatever reason, the law firm that was hosting the directory stopped hosting it. So, but most other firms are protocol are broker protocol members, and it's really very good for the industry as a whole because it helps advisors and clients choose where they want to be without lawsuits that I feel damage the reputation of the business.
Yeah. Mark Elzweig, my friend, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Oh, thank you, Charlie. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a
Yeah,
lot of
good.
fun.
So Mark's website is elzweig.com, elzweig.com. Mark's email address, get this, is elzweig@elzweig.com. So
That's right.
Elzweig. I know he's extremely active on LinkedIn. Mark, where else can people get a hold of you?
That's probably LinkedIn is probably the best place.
Okay.
Is probably the best place. But what I did want to say is I do publish a newsletter
Right. Yeah.
pretty
Yeah.
much bi-monthly. And part of it is I take each channel and I just summarize the deal. So if you want to see what's their spread, what's the range of wirehouses, independent broker dealers, RIAs, what are the deals like in each of those different channels? That's part of what is in our newsletter for each edition. So if you'd like to get it, just send me an email or call me, and I'll be happy to put you on the list.
Yeah. Awesome. Once more, Elzweig, ELZWEIG at elzweig.com.
Thank you, Charlie.
Yeah, thank you,
Thank you
Mark.
so much.
Great to see you again. Thank you for being my guest. You got so much knowledge. Honestly, I mean, I can say that without reservation, if someone's making a move, they should absolutely talk to you. You're a patient guy, you're a nice guy, you're working at their pace. You're not trying to cram deals through. Anyway, yeah, happy to make whatever endorsement for you as an independent recruiter in our industry. I know you're doing right by the people that work with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Charlie. Really
You got
appreciate
it,
it.
Mark. Well,
Really fun. Thanks again.
you got it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and yeah, Mark Marniak's here too. Mark, good to
Oh,
see you.
hey, hi,
He,
Mark.
he, he gives you his endorsement as well.
That's
Um,
great. I appreciate it.
yeah, so awesome. Anyway, so we will get a recording of this to
Thank
anybody who
you.
registered. We'll get a recording out likely tomorrow. And yeah, so Mark, let me know if you need anything, and anybody on here, we're easy people to get a hold of. So thanks for taking some time with me and my friend Mark Elzweig today.
Thank you.
Cheers, Mark.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.